Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at some really fascinating source reports detailing a highly unusual meeting back on September 30th, 2025.
That's right. It was this joint address at Quantico, Virginia. You had President Trump and the defense secretary at the time, Hegseth.
And this wasn't just any meeting. They apparently summoned hundreds of top military leaders. We're talking generals, admirals.
Yeah, pulled them in from all over the world, pretty abruptly, too, from what the reports suggest. Not for a standard briefing on, say, geopolitics, but for something very different.
Exactly. So our task here is to dig into these reports and figure out what the key policy shifts actually were. We're focusing on two main things that really jump out.
Okay.
First, this proposed new role for the military in domestic issues right here at home. And second, some really radical changes to Pentagon culture that were announced.
And the hook, I think, the thing that really makes you stop and think is this proposal to use actual American cities as, quote, training grounds.
Yeah, it signals a real potential blurring of lines between military action and, well, domestic life, merging culture wars with military strategy.
Definitely not your typical Pentagon briefing.
Okay, so let's get into that first major theme, this idea of militarizing the domestic sphere. The president apparently framed it as a war from within.
Right. The language was quite stark. Things like civil disturbances, crime, illegal immigration, presented not just as problems, but as an invasion from within.
He even said it's no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways. That's strong framing.
Very strong. And the proposed solution was just as dramatic, deploying the military and the National Guard into major cities, using them as, like you said, training grounds.
And he named names, didn't he? Specifically pointing to cities like Chicago, New York, L.A., San Francisco.
Called them very unsafe places. And basically told the assembled officers that dealing with them was now a major part of their mission.
Okay, but legally, that sounds complicated, right? Isn't there something preventing that?
There is a very significant something. It's called the Posse Comitatus Act, and it generally forbids using federal troops for domestic law enforcement.
Right, unless Congress steps in or there's like an actual insurrection.
Exactly. So using soldiers for routine policing or even crime response in cities like Chicago or L.A., based on this kind of rhetoric, it bumps right up against that fundamental legal principle.
So how do they justify it? The reports mention Washington, D.C. as a sort of test case.
Yeah, they pointed to a prior deployment in D.C. The claim was pretty bold, that the city went from being the most unsafe to just about our safest really quickly.
And they cited removing, 1,700 career criminals in just 12 days?
That was the number used, yeah. A claim of incredible efficiency.
But does the data back that up?
Well, that's where it gets murky. The source materials we reviewed bring in FBI data suggesting, first, D.C. wasn't actually the highest crime city at that time. Other cities had worse rates.
Okay.
And second, D.C. police data apparently showed homicide trends were already starting to decline before that specific deployment.
So attributing the improvement solely to the military intervention might be a stretch. The data suggests a more complex picture.
It definitely complicates the narrative that this was a simple cause and effect success story.
Okay, let's talk about the rules of engagement. Because if you are deploying troops domestically, how they interact with civilians is crucial. And there were some specific changes announced, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really stark changes. Two, in particular, stand out in the reports.
The first one is just incredibly blunt. For troops facing assault, the rule was given as, they spit, we hit.
Yeah, just 4 words, but it signals a massive shift. It moves away from de-escalation, which is usually the core of domestic crowd control training, towards immediate physical response. Retaliation, essentially.
That's a huge change in mindset and doctrine.
A complete reversal in many ways. And that kind of escalated response policy also extended to the border, specifically for ICE and Border Patrol agents.
Right. The previous policy, if their vehicles were being hit with rocks or bricks, was apparently not to stop, keep moving.
Correct. Yeah. But the new order, as reported, was the exact opposite. Stop the vehicle and, quote, do whatever the hell you want to do.
Wow. The claim was that this immediately stopped the brick-throwing incidents.
That was the president's assertion, yes. That the problem ceased once the aggressive posture was adopted.
Unsurprisingly, this approach caused backlash.
Instantly. You had figures like Illinois Governor Pritzker calling a potential deployment in his state an invasion. Oregon officials reportedly filed lawsuits claiming the administration was overstepping its authority.
And even warnings from within the military community itself.
Yes. The sources mentioned retired Major General Randy Manner expressing concern that these kinds of actions risk making the military look like, in his words, armed thugs.
Which could seriously damage the trust between the military and the public. That's a core element of civil-military relations, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. Blurring that line between soldier and police officer, especially with these kinds of aggressive rules of engagement, is fraught with peril.
So that's the external piece. This major pivot towards domestic intervention, challenging Posse Comitatus. But internally, within the Pentagon, there was just as big a shakeup demanded by Secretary Hegseth.
Well, completely. You can sort of see the internal changes as necessary groundwork for the external mission shift. Hegseth's opening remarks were apparently a direct shot at the existing culture.
Declaring an end to woke, politically correct, and overly sensitive leadership.
Exactly. And it came with an ultimatum, basically. He reportedly told any leaders who weren't on board with this new, tougher direction to do the honorable thing and resign.
No ambiguity there. Very clear message.
There
The old ways are over.
The era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now at every level. It's a direct quote noted in the sources.
And one of the most concrete policy changes had to do with physical fitness standards.
Specifically for combat roles.
Yeah.
The mandate was a return to the highest male standard. They termed it gender-neutral male-level standards,
Right.
but effectively.
It's the male standard.
Right, and Hegseth was apparently very direct about the implications. If women couldn't meet that standard for certain combat jobs, then, quote, so be it.
That's a significant reversal of policies aimed at integrating women into combat roles over the previous decades.
It absolutely is. The stated priority shifted entirely to mission readiness, defined in these very specific physical terms, over goals like diversity or reflecting broader society.
He framed it as getting back to merit, fitness, ability, and character, and suggested past promotions had focused too much on other factors.
Yeah, he explicitly criticized what he saw as promotions based on race or gender quotas or aiming for historic firsts. The message was clear. Those considerations are out. Pure performance metrics are in.
Which, again, unwinds years of diversity and inclusion efforts within the military.
Fundamentally, yes. And alongside that, there was this move to ease up on certain disciplinary rules.
Like reviewing definitions of toxic leadership or hazing.
Exactly. The stated goal was to empower commanders to enforce standards without constantly fearing career repercussions for, say, being too tough.
Allowing for forgivable, earnest, or minor infractions, not to derail a career.
Right. But this creates a real tension, doesn't it? On one hand, you want leaders who can enforce discipline, maintain that warrior ethos.
Yet on the other hand,
Well, rules against toxic leadership and hazing exist for very serious reasons.
yeah,
The sources even reference the tragic 2018 suicide of sailor Brandon Caserta, which investigations linked directly to abusive leadership.
so easing those rules, even with the intention of empowering good leaders, carries a risk of enabling bad behavior.
It's a very fine line to walk, a high-stakes gamble, really.
The reports also mention cracking down on things like beard exemptions and anonymous complaints. Yeah.
All part of this broader push towards ending what was termed the era of unprofessional appearances and creating a more centralized, command-driven structure, potentially reducing avenues for lower ranks to voice concerns outside the chain of command.
Okay, so you have these radical policy shifts, both external and internal. What was the atmosphere like at this Quantico meeting where it was all laid out?
Tense. That's the word that comes through in the reports. Hundreds of top officers, pulled from their commands, sitting through this very politicized, culture-focused address.
The sources say they were mostly stone-faced.
Yeah. Apparently so much so that President Trump actually commented on it, joking he'd never walked into a room so silent before.
You can almost feel the tension. Career military officers being lectured on domestic politics and culture. That silence probably spoke volumes.
It likely did. But the administration used the event not just to lay out demands, but also to project strength and success.
Like rebranding the Department of Defense with the secondary title Department of War.
That was mentioned, yes, a symbolic move, but one meant to signal a shift in mindset.
And they touted recruitment numbers.
Big time. Claimed enlistments were at record highs, hitting 106% of targets. The report seemed to verify this part, noting that the Navy, Air Force, and Space Force hit their goals months early, and the Army even earlier.
So whatever the cultural shifts, they seem to be connecting with potential recruits at that time.
The numbers suggest that yes, and this renewed focus and recruitment surge were being backed by huge amounts of money.
Over $1 trillion committed for the military budget in 2026.
That was the figure announced, described as the most in U.S. history. Massive investment.
And funding some pretty advanced programs like a 6th-generation fighter jet. the F-47?
Right, the F-47, named for the 47th presidency. 6th-gen fighters generally imply capabilities beyond current 5th-gen stealth jets like the F-22 or F-35. We're talking about things like advanced AI integration, networked warfare, possibly optionally manned capabilities.
So flying drones or having pilots, depending on the mission, really cutting-edge stuff.
That's the idea. Future-proofing the force with high-tech platforms.
Which makes the other hardware suggestion mentioned seem, well, almost contradictory. Reviving old-style battleships, solid steel, big guns.
Yeah, that definitely stands out, doesn't it? Bringing back Iowa-class style battleships with, like, 6-inch guns.
What was the rationale there? It seems that low-tech compared to 6th-gen jets.
The reasoning given was purely pragmatic. Bullets are a lot less expensive than missiles.
Ah, okay. So even with a trillion-dollar budget, there's an eye towards cost-effectiveness for certain kinds of threats, maybe coastal defense or shore bombardment.
Seems to be the thinking. A mix of hyper-advanced tech and, well, brute force, where it's deemed cheaper and effective. It's a dual approach.
And all this domestic focus and military buildup was presented alongside claims of foreign policy success.
Yes. The president reportedly mentioned having settled 7 wars, a claim that would need significant unpacking on its own, and pushing NATO allies towards higher defense spending, like 5% of GDP.
So the narrative is, we've stabilized the world, now we're turning this incredibly powerful, well-funded, and culturally reshaped military inwards.
Which really brings us back to the core tension of this whole meeting and the policies it launched.
Exactly. So thinking about all this, what does it really mean? You have this simultaneous push, focusing the military internally on domestic issues, this war from within.
Well, at the same time, pouring record funding into it and overhauling its culture to emphasize toughness, traditional standards, that warrior ethos.
The implications, especially for the relationship between the military and American society, seem huge. You're essentially applying combat standards and a fighting and winning mentality to American cities.
Right. And actively dismantling or at least challenging the legal barriers like Posse Comitatus that have traditionally kept the military out of domestic law enforcement.
It redefines defending the homeland, doesn't it? If crime waves or protests or immigration issues are framed as an invasion, it potentially puts them on par with foreign threats in terms of justifying a military response.
It absolutely elevates the perception of domestic disorder to a national security threat requiring military intervention. The goal stated is a fighting and winning machine.
So the final thought for you, listening to this, has to be, what happens when that machine is aimed inward? If the threat is defined as an invasion from within, what kinds of domestic situations fall under that umbrella? Crime, protests, political dissent.
And what does that mean for civil liberties, for the role of local police, for the fundamental trust between the American people and their military? This isn't just a policy shift. It's potentially a fundamental change in the American system, a breakdown, really, in those traditional lines.
A massive amount to consider there. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.